Who would have thought that criminals from Venezuela would be training in Belarus? And then they were sent to the United States to cause unrest. The information about those who interfered in our elections has been revealed. I think today's video will be one of the most interesting ones I've ever made. The Democratic Party is connected with the drug lords of Latin cartels. Antifa has been reinforced by 5,000 Special Forces operatives trained in Cuba and Belarus. I will now introduce the man who organized Osama bin Laden's capture, a CIA legend and counterterrorism expert whom Trump brought to the White House on his personal plane on his second day as president. His name is Gary Bernsen. Bernsen? Don't say Gary Bernsen.
My business partner and I, my main business partners, started doing what we call asset recovery in 2018. So we targeted the finances of money launderers, focusing on the Del Sol cartel, the Venezuelan cartel. So we started this in 2018, worked on it for about 2.5 years. And then, of course, the election was stolen in 2020. We saw what the 2020 election looked like. And my partner had already conducted some investigations in previous years about these companies in Venezuela and informed me about it. So we started looking into it. We briefly met with Patrick Byrne in 2020 during the elections because he was interested, and we were interested. It took another 2.5 years before we figured out who stole it and how. We recruited members of the cartel and people inside the election companies who were doing this. We got in touch with Patrick again. We went and informed him and General Flynn, Mike Flynn. They were working together on the Americas Project. And by that time, Patrick had spent a significant amount of money on this case. He saw that we really had an answer, so he directed his resources to us. Thank God for Patrick Byrne, because there was no one else in the country who was willing to help. I mean, it's so hard to get support for something like this. And Patrick was brave to do it. So he not only provided funding, but also participated in the operation with us and did a lot of work on election integrity issues.
They're talking about the billionaire now, that's Patrick Burns, who probably spent more than $100 million to find out who was interfering in the United States elections and to stop that interference.
Our story about Venezuela has 4 parts, including the crucial asset recovery. The thing is, this is a criminal enterprise worth $2.7 billion. This is the largest criminal enterprise in the history of the world. Turns out they've been stealing elections ever since. Then there's the part about stealing elections, and they started this back in 2004 with Hugo Chavez's referendum in Caracas. So you have the part about stealing elections. Then you have the Tren de Aragua, which we also worked on, and my main business partner Martin Rodil and I were collecting on it. Actually, there was another former Army officer, Blues Buchholz, who was with me when we had the first meetings about Tren de Aragua, and we received the first 2,000 files with photos and people. And who were they training? And, the Venezuelans trained, 300 people in sabotage, crypto, and weapons training. They sent them to I. They did this with Belarusians and Cubans, and Venezuelan military intelligence trained 300 Turium gang members from Tren de Aragua.
The numbers mentioned are absolutely staggering. Trillions. Company on they falsifying elections around the world, connections between drug cartels and governments. Is a boy with fantasies? He's a person who... He found and caught Ben Laden. Training of Cuba and Belarus, criminals from Venezuelan prisons, sending 5,000 trained special forces made up of murderers and rapists to the United States to organize street fights, supposedly civilian, peaceful protests, as the Democrats explained to us.
And then the last part of what we do is counterintelligence. Look, my main business partner and I, Martin, were the ones who uncovered Manuel Rocha who was the highest-ranking spy ever caught. I knew Ambassador Rocha many years ago. I had contacted him multiple times and knew he was in touch with people involved in the cartel conspiracy. That's why we reached out to FBI counterintelligence officers at a certain location. We told them this ambassador is dealing with these guys. You need to deal with them. They did as soon as they contacted that ambassador. What they did was have someone pose as a Cuban spy because he was working for Cuba, IM. He had spent over 35 years as a spy there when they said they wanted to bring him back. He confessed in 3 two-hour sessions. While recording him, the FBI documented his espionage against the United States for over 35 years. They told him, "Dean, please, we want to reactivate you. Why don't you contact the people?" The first thing he does is send me an email asking, "Hey Gary, is this a good address for us to meet? What if we don't meet because you're a spy?" The FBI arrested him and now he's in federal prison.
By the way, I didn't know he exposed this deep cover spy. It was a huge story. Someone had been leaking America's secrets to our worst enemies for over 30 years.
So, Venezuela is really in America. The heart of darkness. It's a transnational criminal cartel that runs the government. Martin Rodel and I were the main informants who did all this work. And then people like Patrick Byrne, God bless him, joined us. And General Mike Flynn provided tremendous help. And there were others, but these were the main pillars of this effort.
Let me explain. The Democrats wanted to win the Senate and take the White House. So, well, in 2024, the idea is to expand the Supreme Court from 9, which currently has either 5 or 6 conservatives, and 3 liberals, from 9 to 15 or maybe even 24 justices, and to pack it with a lot of ideological allies. We've seen how judges easily sell their conscience, their soul, their oath to uphold the law when they're promised rewards. So make it 10 or maybe even 20 liberals against 5 conservatives. And that's it, bury the country. That is, to pass laws that completely give all the power into the hands of the elite. In other words, to turn our country from a dictatorship of the majority into a dictatorship of the minority, that is, the elite.
These guys are leftists, and when I say leftists, I mean Venezuela, the Cubans. The main business partners are the Russians and the Chinese. The Chinese were heavily involved. It was a hybrid war against America, and we couldn't find any help. We're the people I'm telling you about. And a couple more people in the country were ready to help, to spend years, to spend their own money, their own time. The FBI was after us. They didn't know. We reached out to the government, and, we reached out to the Department of Justice. The lawyer reported this to the Office of Public Integrity, and instead of coming to our aid, they sent people to go after us and try to investigate us and try to put us in jail. It's a shameful thing we went through. I'm just proud of the guys I worked with. People like Martin Rodil and Patrick Byrne and Mike Flynn and others who stood up to try to make sure that the democracy we live in will be passed on to our children and grandchildren.
How easy it is, after all, to bring a country back to the dictatorship of the elites, calling it ideological, religious, some kind of clan, financial, or any other elites, who usually run things in 99% of cases and have ruled all societies and countries in the world. Has it been around 5,700 years? All that's required is for us to do nothing, to stay silent and not pass anything on to our children. Stephen Gardner is the host of this channel. I highly recommend him. His channel has already reached 2 million viewers, and he always covers topics that really interest me, and I hope interest you as well.
So we know that Obama, during the transition period, he, John Brennan, and others, they targeted General Michael Flynn and tried to imprison him for life. President Trump repeatedly claimed the election was rigged and cited numerous anomalies. In the middle of the night, suddenly Biden, surges ahead and magically wins, which helped me understand this. Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and others. After January 6th, they strongly spoke out against many Republicans. They strongly spoke out against Trump. ECRMNNM. They went against everyone who was at those meetings between November and January 6th. Why didn't they go after Patrick Byrne if he was the one who led many of those actions?
In the first part of this, he didn't follow. At the very beginning, he and others tried to break through using engineering methods. All right, Patrick had some really talented people at the very beginning. Engineers and some hackers and people like that who did, those kinds of things. Tech guys, crypto specialists, real top-notch tech guys. And they struggled with it, and for years they struggled with it. Our approach, Martin's and mine, instead, was that we went and recruited people like they do in the CIA. You find a company, hire someone for a lower position, and then move on to another one, and another one, and another one. In the end, we hired over a dozen people. By the time we contacted Patrick, we'd already hired 5 or 6 and understood how long the process would take. But, people who got into trouble at the very beginning got into trouble because they hijacked cars and things like that. Patrick didn't do that. He was careful about it, but he tried to get back through engineering solutions. I can understand why they did that. Our approach was different, and after 2.5 years, we came to Patrick with what we had, and he said, "All right, guys, you did it. Your method worked, and let me join you."
All right, okay, that makes sense.
I wasn't hired for this. I started my own asset recovery company years ago, and it grew into this. And then we weren't looking for cases. Train de Aragua. We met with a Venezuelan opposition member who gave me 2,000 files with photos and explained their training and activities. It was completely unexpected. All right.
Help me understand this. I wasn't aware of Train de Aragua. When President Trump runs for office, he says, look, they're emptying prisons and sending their gangs and people. He
is telling the truth.
Did you tell him about this? Or how did he learn he needed to look for Train de Aragua? Because as soon as he takes office, this is basically the first group that he really directs the government against.
Well, look, there was a group. You have to understand something. Venezuelans have a huge prison system. All right. And they had all these gangs in the country and people in the gangs. There was a group called Pronos, and Pronos were inmates who were kept in high security zones. And they were there with their girlfriends, with weapons, ammunition, and the government gave them a special status. And when they wanted to kill people or eliminate people, they were released from prison, they killed people and came back. They ran death squads from the prisons all over the country. The head of the prison system was a woman, Idris Villara. She was responsible for this. So there was a region in the city that is in the country called Aragua State, and they were building a train from Caracas to Aragua. And this train, the business of building the train and the railway tracks and everything else went bankrupt. So the union, the workers who were working on this, started engaging in kidnappings and extortion to somehow finance themselves. And then many of them were arrested and sent to a prison called El Tacaron. And eventually the prison was so brutal that the army had to storm the place to take control of it. During the assault, 16 or 17 people were killed. We know the general who did this. I spoke with the general who led the assault. Then Nicolas Maduro realized how many of those men were in the prison and how organized they were. That's why he set up a phone line from El Tacaron to communicate with those inmates and kind of get them on his side. Look, the Venezuelans used prison systems for political violence and control, And in fact, they removed police stations around the prisons to make the prisons the center of political and administrative power in those areas. How do you like such a grim dystopian vision of the future? Yeah, wow, these are evil people.
An absolutely unbelievable but unfortunately true story. When bandits run the state, they act like bandits. This shouldn't surprise anyone. It would be strange if they acted any differently.
President Trump knew that many people who crossed the border, some of them had criminal records. Our first meeting with the person who gave me those files was during the Biden administration. It was likely about a year and a half before Donald Trump took office. I requested a meeting, met with Department of Homeland Security representatives abroad, gave them the files, and informed them. I already knew what smuggling was. I had never heard of the Logway trend at that time, and they said, well, we don't have any crimes. What are we supposed to do with this? The Biden administration just doesn't want to handle this. So we were in contact with them the day after President Trump was elected. I got a phone call when I was abroad in Switzerland. And I got a call from one of the Homeland Security Investigations officers, the Homeland Security Investigation staff. And he said, Mr. Bernsen, we have your report on the trend, the Logway trend, right in front of us. When President Trump won, he hadn't taken office yet. We know that we can safely pursue these matters. We feel safe going after them. The Biden administration wouldn't have allowed us to do that. Can you introduce us to the source? I said, of course. I called the source from Switzerland, set up a meeting, and he agreed to work for the Department of Homeland Security within 20 minutes. We weren't competing with the government. We were helping protect the United States and its citizens.
I hate to interrupt, but I have to tell you this. So I was reporting, on Trump's first term and then on Biden. And I saw how the left and the media downplayed the Logway trend. That's when they took over an entire apartment complex. Yeah, they took control of that city. Oh, it's just one building in Texas. And I remember thinking, how can you be so careless with people who were literally just released from prison? And they're here and they're organized and they have crazy weapons. That was wild to me.
Look, they actually opened a used car dealership, bought a few thousand cars worth between $5,000 and $7,000. They sent cars to all their people nationwide from one place. Because they entered illegally, they lacked driver's licenses, credit cards, and banking services. They had no choice. Over $1 billion was spent on used cars. Subtitles by Dima Torzak. Look, from my conversations with the guys from Trendaragu whom I met, they have at least 4,000 young women working in the sex industry who were victims of human trafficking to the United States. And I met with people from the FBI and they said, well, our analysts think that you are lying about this and they want us to prove that you are not telling the truth. I actually paid the source myself for the information, the source who gave me all this information. When I met him, he had fled Venezuela. I gave him a few $1,000s since he was in trouble and asked for nothing in return. I hadn't seen him in 11 months when he suddenly called and said, Mr. Bernsen, I have this for you. It included justice system data, photos, and fingerprints on 2,000 of those gang members. So the point was, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the CIA under the Biden administration weren't collecting this information. They were on standby. They weren't gathering data against Venezuela or the Cartel del Sol, and there's a reason for that. The reason is that they were colluding with that administration and that cartel because they knew they could secure the elections for them. Make no mistake, what was this about? Make no mistake. All right, listen. I led the invasion of Afghanistan. I was responsible for the bombings in East Africa. I was the CIA's chief of Hezbollah operations for years and was responsible for the Hobart Towers and Argentina bombings. Same. This wasn't my first time. I didn't just fall off the turnip truck on my way to this case. I've been doing this for 40 years. I'm 68 and have been in the business a long time. There's no need to make anything up. These were bad people stealing the elections, and our political apparatus, the Democratic Party, knew, and some Republicans knew too. Yes, some Republicans knew too, so, you need to look around. Everyone else got sued. Okay, everyone else got sued except me. We went out and told them, we have your source code, we have witnesses. I got a letter from Dominion. That's right, Fox paid them $768.5 million. They sent me a letter to back off. I didn't back off. Forget about it. I want to see them in the discovery process. They don't want to meet me in the discovery process. They don't want interviews. They don't want to meet with me and my witnesses, the witnesses that Martin Patrick and I brought in. They're afraid. They should be afraid. They sold the company a week ago, right? They're running away. That's Dominion Smartmatic. Another part of this, which has the same source code, has the same lineage. These guys are together. Their president was indicted. He has an additional indictment in Miami for corruption related to the elections in the Philippines. Look, they first used these machines in Venezuela, then in Latin America, then in the United States, and they stole elections in more than 70 countries around the world using this code.
I can't confirm or deny that, but there have been complaints all over the world that suddenly, during elections, people voted differently than what the polls said they would. That is, public opinion polls even a day before the elections showed completely different numbers and trends. So we vote, and then someone counts it however they want. Is this what democracy is? And always. For some reason, they only rigged the elections to the left, never to the right. That is, bandits from Nicaragua, enforcers from Mexico, Belarusians, Chinese, Russians, Iranians, they were always helping the left. Don't you find that striking, or rather understandable? Like, if you think about it, if you really consider it, isn't it still overwhelming?
A full-scale attack on global democracy has taken place, shifting the world to the left. And it was the Venezuelans, it was Soros's people who were helping them and meeting with them. It was the Cubans and the Venezuelans. And the Democratic Party in the United States realized, the leaders realized what was happening. And I suppose President Trump, Tulsi Gabbard, and others, they were informed about this because I see George Soros and Venezuela in the headlines like never before. Yes, they know. The president understands. We went to the office of the Director of National Intelligence several times, but they didn't inform the leadership there. We had to deliver our briefings directly to the president because people in the intelligence community were blocking it. They were blocking it because they weren't doing their damn job. And there are high-ranking people in the intelligence community on the payroll of the cartels and the Cubans. I'll say it again. There are people in the intelligence community, in the State Department, and in the National Security Council. Over the past decade, we've had infiltration after infiltration, and their reach is so good that they're not just gathering intelligence, they're making policy decisions.
That's a serious accusation. In the United States, within the law enforcement agencies of the Department of Justice and the State Department, there are cartel supporters.
They've also infiltrated United States national security. During the Biden administration and during Trump's first administration and during the Obama administration, they all failed terribly. The president now understands the problem and is pushing back. They don't grasp how serious the counterterrorism and counterintelligence issues are in the United States. It's shocking. Again, we, not the FBI, turned in Russia. Remember something else from years ago? Who? They arrested Kendall Meyer at the State Department? He was the head of Bureau of Intelligence and Research. Who was he working for 30 years? The Cubans. All right. They arrested Ana Montes in the Defense Intelligence Agency. She was a Cuba officer who was spying for the Cubans. Time and again, the Cubans outplay us, and now it's probably worse than ever. You know, Director Redcliffe and Tulsi Gabbard, they need to get together. They need to focus on counterintelligence. Every time I go there and talk to people, I interact with analysts, not operatives. Most of the operatives have been let go. We don't need to talk to analysts. We need people who will take action.
All right, so then what? So you have Democrats saying, why is Trump trying to start a war with Venezuela? You have Rand Paul saying Trump has nothing to do with fishing vessels. He has nothing to do with Maduro. Venezuela is not a cartel. We need to worry about Mexico. Why? Why are we deploying the biggest aircraft carrier?
They don't understand. Rand Paul doesn't understand. He's poorly informed, so...
Why are we putting so much pressure on Maduro?
Well, first of all, he's the leader of the Cartel del Solis. The government is a cartel. All right, and they control Tron del Aragua, and they conducted the very important person. Listen, they're waging hybrid warfare against us, and we in the United States were just standing there with our jaws dropped. Donald Trump is fighting back. God bless him, that's the most dangerous thing. Look, Cubans, Russians, Iranians, the Chinese used Venezuela to break through the defenses of the United States, and they almost took over our country and took it away from us. Almost. And I think that Donald Trump understands that now. And, he has good people. I'm a big fan of Stephen I am. Miller, I'm a big fan of Pete Hegseth. He has good people there. I know many of them. I know people like, I've known them for many, many years. Several people in the cabinet, And I believe that Donald Trump will take action.
Well, to sum up, the most fragile social structure on earth is democracy. Now, there it is. It collapses as soon as one generation is ready to trade even a little bit of freedom for security. And democracy itself is political, but there is also market democracy. It's a trap. And what about the Greeks, who were the first to actually apply it? Not invent it, but apply it, right? What do they say about this? Democritus, you know who he is, said it's mob rule. The common people there. Well, in our terms, the rabble, yes, Aristotle, not a stupid man at all, said that the poor majority would rule. So then he talked about politik or politique. Who knows how it's in Greek? I don't really know Greek that well. So he called democracy the rule of a selected part of the population. That's better. Well, probably better, but not by much. Platon saw democracy as a transition from oligarchy, describing it as tyranny, whether of immortality, the majority, or an individual. Well, monarchy, call it whatever you want. Democracy, the Greeks said, is the rule of an incompetent majority. In a democracy, demagogues who know how to manipulate the emotions of the crowd will rule. Democracy, said Aristotle, levels the merits of outstanding people, and so to speak, these outstanding individuals get no advantage over mediocrity. And democracy is the rule of the majority, not of the law. Well, let me add something from myself. So, neither morality nor justice. That's absolutely right. That's it. Pressure, decision, tyranny, dictatorship of the crowd. Let it continue. The power of the majority, the plebs of the crowd, often offended, often agitated, and unable not to think. Well, the crowd can't think at all. Only individuals can think. But in a crowd, emotions take over and thoughts disappear. So naturally, it can't reflect. It can't suppress or stop its emotions, gentlemen. As we can see, hundreds of thousands of our fellow citizens are ready to betray and sell out, to lie, to abandon all our beliefs and laws, ready to sell themselves for 30 or even 130 pieces of silver. Their own mother, and maybe even all or some of their children. And for some reason, they mostly concentrate on the left side of our political spectrum. It's not that there aren't any on the right, there are, but on the right they're at least scattered, while on the left it's like a whole nest. They must be punished, they must be exposed, celebrated as traitors. And then we need to try to organize a system where deceit, betrayal, and selling out are incredibly disadvantageous, while all moral qualities and choices are incredibly beneficial. You may be wondering how, right? The system is already established as a theory, which means it has been proven. A theorem needs proof, but a theory has already been proven. The theory was developed in 1961 in Los Angeles. Andrei Iosif Golambus was the chairman, president, director, I'm not sure, of the Institute of Free Enterprise in Los Angeles. This was from 1961 to 1989 of the last century. And you know, just like Marx's book or Marx's books gave rise to those nightmares called communism, just like the book or works of Thomas Paine served as the beginning of what we call the American Revolution, that is, the Declaration of Independence, greatly influenced the Constitution. In the same way, Golambus's book is already starting to influence what is happening in our Golambus theory, the Book of Golambus. There are many books, but few integrated theories, and I don't think any are proven. This is probably, well, out of what I've come across, probably the first one. We have a whole series of videos, you could say like 10-minute video stories, video lectures, video seminars, yes, about this system. Below there will be a link to the project called Roadmap to Freedom. Here it is. Well, that's probably all for today, gentlemen. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share with your friends. Goodbye.